This year, you stood with Detroit Public Radio, supporting free speech and independent media when it mattered most. WDET is grateful for our members who make this service to our community possible. If you've donated recently, thank you. If you've never given, your first gift today helps us reach our goal of 250 new members by December 8th. Your support keeps bias-free news, essential music, and vital conversations flowing. Join us at WDET.org/give. Thank you.
Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. The recent pause in SNAP benefits has pushed hunger back into the headlines. Families who were already stretching every dollar suddenly had to stretch the impossible. At the same time, grocery stores, stadiums, airports, and restaurants were still throwing away food that could have fed them. Jasmine Crow Houston has spent years thinking about that contradiction, and she built her company, Gooder, to close the gap. The idea is simple but radical. Hunger isn't about having too little food. It's about wasting too much of it and failing to move it to the people who need it. And Jasmine Crow Houston joins us now to explain. Jasmine, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
We're excited to have you. And before we get into the origins of Gooder, which are very interesting, in the simplest terms possible, could you just tell us exactly what Gooder does? Is this like dumpster diving at scale?
Great question. Yes, it's definitely not dumpster diving at scale. In simple forms, Gooder, our mission is to feed more, waste less. So we help businesses that have excess food. So think of the galas you've been to, weddings you've attended, the corporate cafeterias that just have excess food every single day that traditionally ends up in landfill. We help them redirect that to a network of nonprofits. And on the other side of our business, to kind of feed more, we build grocery stores, both in cities, inside of schools and communities, to make sure that we're solving the food access and food insecurity gap in this country. And it's all rooted in the principle that we have more than enough.
Right. We do have abundance here, and it is about getting it to the folks that need it. I have to tell you, Jasmine, in a previous life, I would pick up catering gigs at these, palatial homes and these really extravagant events. And all of the catering staff would take home as much of this food as they possibly could carry, as they could pack up. And yet the amount of food that went in the trash, and I mean, we're talking about really delicious gourmet items. It was, I think, stunning to everyone who was working around it and witnessing that.
I would agree. And, I would say in my previous life as well, I worked as a waitress, I worked as a bartender. And so even before I started this company, all the while in my life, I was realizing that there was so much waste. I just wasn't doing anything about it until now.
I want to go back to something that really shaped this whole trajectory for you. When you first began feeding people in your one-bedroom apartment in Atlanta, and at that time you were responding to visible hunger. At the same time, you found businesses discarding food, as we've just discussed. What was the moment you realized this was about supply chains and logistics? And take us back to your apartment, if you would.
Yeah, I started feeding people experiencing homelessness back in 2013, a couple of months after I had first moved to Atlanta. And so I was feeding largely on the streets, but also inside of senior homes. And a video of one of my pop-up restaurants actually went viral. And I think what I realized at that moment when it went viral is that people were more so I think they were shocked at the dignity in which I was feeding people. And so the questions that people were asking me is, which restaurants donated the food? Because I would simply allow people to have options to choose almost from a menu like they were at a restaurant, even though they were homeless at the time. And I gave them their dignity back. I gave them joy. They got to sit down. They got to have a coursed meal. And when people kept asking me which restaurants donated the food, I was like, nobody. It was a little flattering because it showed how great we prepared things. A lot of this coming from my days working in the service industry. But I thought, which restaurants could donate this food? And it was when I started doing that research that I became ultimately blown away when I'm simply just Googling, thinking I'll get a list of all the restaurants that donate their food. Instead, I fall into this deep rabbit hole of food waste, and I'm reading all these studies by Harvard and all these policy groups, and I'm just blown away at how much food we waste in this country. And I'm thinking about how hard it is for me and how I'm taking $5, $10 donations, going to multiple stores to feed 300 and 400 people, all the while food in and around the city that I live in, and I'm doing this, is going to waste. And I think that was the moment where it was just kind of infuriating.
So as you saw hunger not as a scarcity issue, but a logistics one, that insight changed the way that you were imagining solutions. I want to go back to something you said, though, and it is about dignity. Because I realize the idea of dignity plays a big role in your work with things like the shop-style markets. How did your personal history influence how you think about generosity and dignity and access?
I think a lot of it really just came from doing the work and feeding on the streets and just also volunteering. I mean, there were so many times I would volunteer at a food bank or a food pantry, and after we put all these bags of food or boxes of food together, I would think, what are these families going to make of this, which we're giving them? And I realized that it wasn't really on the nonprofits that I was donating with. They were working off of donations, but no one thought about the idea of meals, of actually families being able to feed themselves. We were looking at it as food. And so it didn't work just to put a bunch of things in a box that were donated and give it to a family. Yes, it's free, but it doesn't meet the need. And that's why I was so vocal around the SNAP benefits cutoffs, because people that rely on SNAP have different dietary needs and restrictions, and people don't think about that. They think, oh, just go to the food bank and get whatever they give you. What if you're gluten-free? What if you're vegan? What if you can't have dairy? And that's where food banks and food pantries, in my opinion, get it very wrong.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about what I mentioned, the shop-style markets? Because it's nice to see this emerging as part of the conversation when we think about hunger. And by that, I'm talking about the fact that food banks, they seem to really diminish the type of autonomy and dignity that people should be able to have when they're selecting food for themselves. As you've noted, people have dietary restrictions, and should we be in a situation where folks just approach a facility and they're handed a box of items that they didn't really have a chance to go through or pick out?
Yeah, I mean, it's what we've built with these Gooder markets and our Gooder grocery stores inside of schools is everything you're describing. We have milk sections, we have dairy, we have vegan, we have frozen foods, fresh produce. We have, of course, shelf-stable items as well. And we serve, even in our market that we just opened in Atlanta, 200 families and seniors come and shop at that store for free every month. But then we serve a network of families who pay, and no one knows the difference, who's shopping for free, who's paying, because we've created that system. But I think the dignity piece goes a long way in restoring people and restoring their hope. If I'm just getting a box of food, I almost feel very much discarded. And in a previous life, I spent a lot of time volunteering with foster children, and I remember one of our biggest initiatives was to get them pieces of luggage, because so often as they went from foster home to foster home, they were taking their items in trash bags, and I almost equate it to being the same thing. So even though I'm seeing a lot of adoption and kind of this dignity first models in food banks and in pantries, it still is often a lot of donated products. So you may have a full shelf of beans and a full shelf of corn, and yes, you get the opportunity to pick it, but your selections and your options are very limited. So we really focus on having a variety of SKUs, a variety of items that families can choose from so that we can meet the whole need. It is very different and hugely a radical different way of thinking as it relates to how we solve hunger in this country. But I think it's high time that we get on the ball to really address this, because the numbers of people going hungry. Yes, they were exacerbated by the SNAP benefit pause, but they've been bad since the pandemic, and they've continued to rise. And I think that's the conversation that a lot of people aren't having.
My guest is Jasmine Crowe Houston, the founder and CEO of Gooder. She's someone who has looked at both sides of hunger, the empty pantry and the overflowing dumpster, and decided the problem wasn't scarcity, but the way our systems move food. We're talking about the recent SNAP pause, the families caught in the middle, and how Gooder is rewriting the story of waste and hunger. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we'll explore how Jasmine chooses the next city Gooder expands to and whether that road might lead to Detroit. I'm Robin Vincent. We're continuing our conversation with Jasmine Crowe Houston, the founder of the company Gooder. It uses technology to redirect surplus food, reduce waste, and get meals to people who need them. We're speaking on the heels of the recent SNAP benefits pause, which has thrust hunger into the spotlight. And it's impossible to ignore the contrast. While families struggle to fill their carts, America still throws away nearly 40% of the food we produce. Jasmine is working to close that gap, building systems that catch good food before it's wasted and move it quickly and with dignity to the communities that need it now. Jasmine, I want to stay on the subject of the recent SNAP pause and how it put hunger into sharp relief. Food banks say they're still seeing higher demand, and at the same time, they're seeing less government funding. I'm wondering, how has the urgency changed the conversations you're having with your partners? Has it changed your strategy?
I think it has. It's deepened the strategy. I believe our strategy always was the same. What I'm hoping is that it changes their mindset, that they'll be open to solving hunger and addressing it in new ways. We have been really fortunate to have some great donors over the last couple of weeks. Tyler Perry donated to the Gooder Foundation and allowed us to explore and expand our efforts to serving more families in and around Atlanta. But we really want to do more. I think we've been doing this work now. I've been working on Gooder for nearly 10 years next year. And I want to be in every other city that is out there because our model does really work. It's just we can't only be open to new ideas in times of crisis when things happen like a SNAP benefit pause.
Yeah, I think that's an important notion to think about. We can't wait for crisis to act because, really, the crisis is enduring. The crisis goes on whether it's grabbing national headlines or not, right?
Exactly. It really does. Even after the SNAP benefit pause, it's not that families still aren't in need. We have record numbers of calls and emails coming in for help for Thanksgiving. So the need is high. My team was just in Portsmouth, Virginia, and Richmond, Virginia. I'm doing a series of our pop-up grocery stores, and every single one of them sold out from a registration standpoint. So there's not a cost, but we have families register, and they filled up in minutes. And so the need is really bad.
I want to think about Gooder from the standpoint of it being venture-backed, for-profit, a mission-driven company, though, and how that can potentially present tensions. Because you've got investor expectations, mission fidelity, pricing for clients, and community needs. And I think what's so striking about Gooder is that it really does offer a solution to a problem. And for me as a journalist, I'm interested in not only reporting on the problems, but offering solutions. But this has me wondering some of the potential challenges with this solution. How do
There's definitely some misalignment there for sure. It's funny, I'm writing about this in my book now because I often wonder, did I make the right decision going the venture capital route. But what I will say is, had I not taken venture capital back in 2018, and mind you, it was really hard to raise any capital in this space. I took over 218 meetings, heard no so many times. And it was actually an investor, ironically, Charles Hudson, who is from Detroit, Michigan. And when I finally spoke with him, he said, I get hunger. But prior to speaking to investors in Silicon Valley and Boston and New York, it was almost as if there's no business for this, because they only saw hunger, as many people in America do, donating to their local food bank, and that's how it's done. And so I was approaching this with a very different space of, hey, we can solve hunger, and it is a business. And the business that I understood it to be from an investment standpoint was these clients that we were going after were already throwing away their food, and they were paying to do it. And so we wanted to come to them with a different solution to how they address their food waste in particular. And so that's really where I felt like a lot of investor interest grew. Where the investor interest was not, sadly, was on the hunger side. And that was what was, for me, and still continues to be with investors, the biggest misalignment, because I always have to say to investors, no one will ever give me $100 to feed a family, and I'll spend $20 on actual food and pocket 80. And that's kind of where investors tend to lie. They want these really high margins. And when it really comes down to the hunger side of the business, it's simply not possible if you're really in the business for the purpose of feeding families, which is what I'm in it for. So there's a lot of misalignment there. I think there's a part of our business that 100% should be venture backed so that it can scale quicker. And I think there's a part of our business on the hunger side that requires more patient capital, people that are really interested in outcomes. This is where I would hope that one day at the height of our business, foundations will come in and say, hey, do you really want to solve hunger? Even if it's in one city, I've been waiting for that challenge. We have built a plan and a system, but who will fund it? Because It definitely costs. I mean, we all go to the grocery store. We all buy groceries in order to feed people with
dignity. Jasmine, we're running out of time here, and I do want to think about that question of who will fund it, because your work exists partly because government systems aren't meeting the need. I'm wondering, from your perch, what would local, state, or federal policy have to look like for a company like Gooder to become irrelevant in the best way possible?
And we are starting to work with states and specifically cities to build more sustainable solutions to the food system. And I'm excited to see that grow. From a policy standpoint, I would love the day that when every business goes to get their food service license, they have to simply at least identify how they're going to handle their food waste. Do they have a nonprofit identified that can take the excess? Will they leave the excess out? I mean, what's the plan? Are they going to compost? If we just started with that as a mere policy, just the thought of thinking about waste, we'd start to really change a lot of ways that people currently think about waste now, which is to throw it away. So that's the simplest thing on a policy level. There are countries like Italy and France where it's actually illegal for businesses to throw away food. They get fined up to 10,000 euro a day. So when you put numbers behind kind of this problem and, hey, you have to feed people or we're going to fine you, I would think a lot more businesses would donate their excess food.
So for someone like you in the space of hunger relief, that's got to sound like music to your ears. Yes, get fined for throwing away something as precious as food.
I agree. It really does.
You've expanded beyond Atlanta. You're operating in California, in Illinois, in Alabama. So how do you decide which places to expand into next? And is Detroit on your radar? I mean, this is a city where a big chunk of our population is in abject poverty.
You know, I have honestly expanded where we had customer interest because it was like, hey, how do we get there? Who's going to fund it? So that's really what's driven a lot of our expansion is, hey, who's going to help us get to these new locations? We've done some work in Detroit as it relates to some of our pop-up grocery stores, but seeing that you guys just elected a new mayor, I do believe that there's an opportunity to work deeper in Detroit. There are a lot of food deserts in that city, and I think our model that we've built in Atlanta with our Gooder Community Market would be perfect in Detroit. So I'm open to trying to get there. If anyone is listening that has connections in the city, please reach out because Detroit is one of the cities I've definitely been speaking about for years.
Jasmine, in the last minute we have here, when you imagine your legacy, let's say 10 or 20 years out, what does success look like for you personally and for Gooder as a system in the food economy?
Success for me personally, just looks like more people fed. I think a lot of times while we've done great things, it's hard for me to really think I still haven't failed in my mission, just because there's still so many people that need access to food. So success for me personally will look at some level of systems change that I can say, but for Gooder, if we hadn't been around, this wouldn't have happened. That's what I'll look like. And I think that's when I'll be able to rest. I think for Gooder, I think expansion, I think recognition, and just understand being a household name, just as people think of waste management. When they think of food, they think of Gooder and how we handle it.
Jasmine Crow Houston is the founder and CEO of Gooder. That's GOODR. Her work asks us to look at hunger not as an unsolvable crisis, but as a system we can redesign, one delivery route, one recovered meal, one city at a time, as the country wrestles with the fallout from the SNAP pause and the reality that we waste so much food while so many go without. Her voice is a reminder that solutions already exist and that they're closer than we think. Jasmine, thank you for the work you do and for spending time with me today.
Thank you.
Coming up, a Flint-based neurologist shares the benefits of catching Alzheimer's early. This is The Metro on WDET. Stay with us.